I signed over 370,000 Australian dollars. I believed every word she said. I thought we were building something permanent, a resort, a future, a life together in her country. But the land was never hers. The permits were forged. And the woman I loved? She disappeared the day after the final bank transfer cleared. I'm Kenneth. I'm 62, and I destroyed my entire retirement for a lie I couldn't see coming. I met Rowena on a Tuesday afternoon in Baguio. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't even looking for company. I'd flown to the Philippines because Brisbane felt too empty after Margaret died. 3 years of silence in that house. 3 years of cooking meals for one. I needed air. I needed distance. I thought 2 weeks in the mountains would clear my head. I walked into the tourism office near Burnham Park because I needed a map. She was behind the counter, smiling at an elderly couple, patient and kind. When they left, she looked at me. "First time in Baguio?" she asked. Her voice was warm, not flirtatious, just genuinely welcoming. "Yes," I said. "I'm just trying to figure out where to go." She handed me a brochure and circled 3 spots with a pen. "These are beautiful this time of year," she said. "But if you want something quiet, away from tourists, I can recommend a trail most visitors don't know about." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was maybe 30, dressed professionally, no heavy makeup, no desperation in her eyes, just competence. "That sounds perfect," I said. She wrote down directions on a napkin and handed it to me. "Enjoy your stay," she said. I thanked her and left. But I came back the next day. I told myself it was because I had questions about the trail. But really, I just wanted to talk to her again. "You came back," she said when she saw me. There was a smile in her voice. "The trail was incredible," I said. "Thank you," she nodded. "I'm glad you liked it." We talked for 20 minutes. She asked where I was from, what I did, why I came to the Philippines. I told her about Margaret, about the logistics company I used to manage, about retirement feeling like a slow fade into irrelevance. She listened. Not the polite listening people do when they're waiting for their turn to speak. Real listening. "That sounds lonely," she said quietly. I felt something crack open inside me. Nobody had said that to me in 3 years. Not my friends. Not my son. Nobody. "It is," I admitted. She looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. Sympathy? Understanding? "Would you like to get coffee after my shift?" she asked. "I finish in an hour." I said yes before I could think twice. We sat in a small cafe overlooking the plaza. She ordered for both of us in Tagalog, then translated the menu for me. "I'm Rowena," she said, extending her hand. "Kenneth," I replied. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her work, about growing up in Baguio, about her family's struggles and dreams. She asked about my life, my career, my plans for the future. "I don't really have plans," I admitted. "I thought retirement would feel like freedom, but it just feels like waiting." She leaned forward slightly. "Waiting for what?" I didn't have an answer. She didn't push. She just nodded like she understood. "Before we parted," she said, "if you're still here tomorrow, I'd love to show you more of the city." I was supposed to leave in 3 days. I extended my stay for another week. We spent almost every evening together. She took me to night markets, hilltop viewpoints, small restaurants locals loved. She never asked for anything, never hinted at money or gifts. She just seemed to enjoy my company. One night, sitting on a bench overlooking the city lights, she said, "You know what I dream about?" I looked at her. "What?" "Building something that lasts," she said. "Not just working for someone else forever. Something I can be proud of." I felt a pull in my chest. That's exactly what I'd been missing. Purpose, legacy. "Like what?" I asked. She hesitated. "My family owns land near the coast. Beautiful property. I've always thought it could be something special. A small resort maybe. Something intimate and peaceful." She laughed softly. "But dreams don't pay bills." I wanted to tell her I could help, that I had savings, resources, a lifetime of business experience. But I held back. We barely knew each other. Instead, I said, "That sounds like a beautiful dream." She smiled at me. "Maybe one day." When I left for Brisbane 2 days later, she hugged me at the airport. "Take care of yourself, Kenneth," she said. "You deserve more than loneliness." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. We exchanged numbers. I thought that would be the end of it. A beautiful 2 weeks, a fleeting connection. But she texted me that night. Just a simple message. "Safe travels." For the next 2 months, we messaged every day, video calls twice a week. She never asked me for anything. She just wanted to know about my day, my thoughts, my life. She told me about her work stress, her mother's health problems, her dreams she was too scared to chase. I felt alive again. One night, I said, "I'm coming back." She went quiet for a moment. "Really?" "Really," I said. "I miss talking to you in person." Her face lit up. "I'd love that." 3 weeks later, I landed in Manila. She picked me up at the airport. When I saw her, something settled inside me. This wasn't just loneliness. This was real. "Welcome back," she said, smiling. "Let me show you something special." We drove for 4 hours to the coast. The property was breathtaking. 3 hectares of untouched land overlooking the ocean. Coconut trees swayed in the breeze. The beach below was pristine. "This is your family's land?" I asked. She nodded. "My grandfather bought it decades ago. We've held on to it, but we've never had the resources to develop it." I walked to the edge of the bluff. I could see the potential immediately. Small cottages, a main building, infinity pool, sustainable tourism, intimate and peaceful. Exactly what people like me were searching for. "This could be incredible," I said. She stood beside me. "I know, but I can't do it alone." I turned to her. "What if you didn't have to?" She looked at me carefully. "What do you mean?" I took a breath. "What if we did this together? You have the land. I have capital and experience. We could build something real here." She shook her head slowly. "Kenneth, I can't let you risk your money on a dream. It's not just your dream," I said. "I need this too. I need a reason to wake up excited again." She looked at me for a long moment. "Are you sure?" I took her hand. "I'm sure." That night, over dinner, we started planning. She pulled out a notebook filled with sketches, ideas, rough projections. "I've been thinking about this for years," she admitted, "but I never thought I'd have the chance." I felt a surge of purpose I hadn't felt since before Margaret got sick. "Let's make it happen," I said. She smiled, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "I want to do this right. Legally. Properly. No shortcuts." I nodded. "Absolutely. We'll hire lawyers, get permits, do everything by the book. And we do this together," she said firmly. "Equal partners. Your capital, my land, shared profit. I won't let you carry all the risk." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. She wasn't trying to take advantage. She was protecting me. "Deal," I said. We shook hands. Then she leaned over and kissed me gently. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered. I believed in us. The next day, she introduced me to Javier. He was a contractor she'd worked with before, mid-40s, professional, confident. "Rowena told me about your project," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I think it's very feasible." We spent the afternoon walking the property. Javier pointed out water access, foundation options, building codes. He spoke my language. Timelines, budgets, logistics. For initial development, land formalization, permits, basic infrastructure. "You're looking at roughly 18 million pesos," he said. "That's about 370,000 Australian dollars. I did the mental math. It was most of my retirement savings, but I'd built a business from scratch before. I understood calculated risks. "And that gets us to what stage?" I asked. "Operational," Javier said. 6 cottages, main building, basic amenities. You'd be open for soft launch within 18 months. Rowena looked at me nervously. It's a lot of money, Kenneth. We don't have to move this fast. But I was already convinced. This was real, professional, transparent. Let's do it, I said. She looked uncertain. Are you absolutely sure? I took her hand. I've never been more sure of anything. Javier smiled. Then let's start the paperwork. Over the next week, we met with lawyers, architects, surveyors. Rowena insisted on proper documentation for everything. She introduced me to her mother, Mila, a warm woman in her mid-50s who cried when Rowena told her about the project. Thank you, Mila said, gripping my hands. You're giving my daughter a chance at something real. I felt proud. I felt useful. I felt like I mattered again. Before I left, Rowena and I sat on the beach at sunset. I want you to know something, she said. This isn't just business for me. I looked at her. What do you mean? I care about you, Kenneth, deeply. I know there's an age difference. I know people might judge, but what I feel is real. My throat tightened. I feel it too. She rested her head on my shoulder. Then let's build something beautiful, together. I kissed the top of her head. I'd forgotten what hope felt like. When I returned to Brisbane, I couldn't stop thinking about the project, about her. My son called. Dad, you seem different, happier. I smiled. I am. What's going on? He asked. I told him about Rowena, about the resort. He went quiet. Dad, that's a lot of money. I know, I said, but I've done my research. This is legitimate. Have you had independent lawyers look at the documents? I hesitated. Rowena's lawyer is handling everything. Another pause. Just be careful, okay? I bristled. I'm not an idiot. I know what I'm doing. I didn't say you were. I just don't want you to get hurt. I'm fine, I said coldly. We ended the call. I knew he meant well, but he didn't understand. He'd never been alone like I had. Within 2 weeks, I wired the first 50,000 Australian dollars for land title formalization. Rowena sent me photos of the paperwork, official-looking documents with government stamps. First step complete, she texted. Thank you for trusting me. I felt validated. A month later, she called. Kenneth, the surveying team needs payment. 85,000. Is that still okay? I logged into my bank. Sending it now. You're sure? She asked. Positive, I said. She sent me photos of the survey crew on site. Maps, measurements. Everything looked legitimate. My friend Tony called. Mate, I heard you're investing in the Philippines. That true? Yeah, I said. A resort project. Have you physically seen legal documents, titles, permits? Rowena's handling all of that. There are a lot of scams targeting expats. I felt anger rise. She's not scamming me. She's my partner. I hope you're right, Tony said. I really do. I hung up feeling defensive. Why did everyone doubt me? Why couldn't they see what I saw? I flew back to the Philippines 6 weeks later. Rowena picked me up, radiant. Wait until you see the progress, she said. But when we arrived at the lawyer's office, something felt off. The building was older than I expected. The office was cramped. The lawyer, a man in his 50s, seemed distracted. Everything is moving forward, he assured me. These processes take time in the Philippines. I wanted to see the actual title documents. They're being processed, Rowena said gently. The bureaucracy here is slow. I nodded. That made sense. Javier showed me photos of foundation markings, material quotes, contractor bids. It all looked professional. We visited the site. A few locals waved at Rowena. She introduced me to neighbors. This is Kenneth, she said proudly. We're building a resort together. They smiled. Congratulated us. I felt reassured. That night, Rowena sensed my tension. Are you worried? She asked. A little, I admitted. It's a lot of money. She took my hands. I understand. But Kenneth, I promise you, everything is legitimate. This is how business works here. It's relationship-based, personal, different from Australia. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. We met with Mila again. She made me dinner, thanked me tearfully. "You're changing our family's future," she said. I felt guilty for doubting. The next day, I asked to meet the lawyer privately. "He's in Manila this week," Rowena said, "but I can schedule something when he's back." I agreed. That evening, we had dinner at a small restaurant. The hotel receptionist, a young woman named Elena, was there with friends. When she saw me with Rowena, her expression changed. Just for a second. Something unreadable, concern, pity. I pushed it away. Paranoia. Before I left, I transferred another $50,000 for permits. Rowena kissed me at the airport. "We're so close, Kenneth. Thank you for not giving up on us." I held her tight. Never. Back in Brisbane, the doubt crept in at night. I'd wake up at 3 a.m, mentally reviewing everything. The paperwork I hadn't personally verified. The lawyer I'd barely met. The permits I'd only seen in photos. But then Rowena would text, send me updates, photos. Her voice on video calls was so genuine, so warm. I couldn't reconcile the woman I knew with the idea that this was all fake. Tony called again. "Have you physically seen the land title?" "It's being processed," I said. "That's what people say when there is no title, Kenneth." "You don't know her." "You're right," he admitted. "I don't. I just know the stories. Australian men losing everything overseas. I'm not one of those men," I said. "I hope not, mate. I really hope not." But after we hung up, I couldn't shake the unease. I called Rowena. "Can I see the actual title documents?" "Not photos. The originals." She paused. "Of course. When you come next month, I'll have everything ready." "Promise?" "I promise," she said. "Kenneth, do you not trust me?" Her voice cracked slightly. "I do," I said quickly. "I'm sorry. I just want to make sure everything is perfect." "I understand," she said. "I'd feel the same way with this much money." I felt ashamed for doubting her. 3 months later, she called with excitement. "We're ready for the final phase. Construction starts in 2 weeks." My heart raced. Really? Really? "But Kenneth, this is the big one. $235,000 for contractors, materials, foundation work. Once this is paid, we break ground." I stared at my computer screen. My savings balance. This was everything. Everything I had left. "That's all my remaining savings," I said quietly. She went silent. "I know. And if you're not comfortable, we can wait. Find other investors. I understand if you don't trust me anymore." Her voice was small, hurt. I felt something break inside me. "No," I said. "I trust you. Let's do this." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I love you, Kenneth," she whispered. I felt tears in my eyes. "I love you too." I wired the money the next day, 235,000 Australian dollars. Every cent I had left. For the first 24 hours, everything seemed fine. Rowena texted updates, confirmation that funds were received, photos of signed contracts. Then on day 2, her messages slowed. "Busy with contractors," she wrote. By day 3, she stopped responding. I called. Voicemail. I called Javier. Number disconnected. Panic set in. I booked an emergency flight. Landed in Manila 36 hours later. Drove straight to Baguio. Her apartment was empty. The landlord, an older man, looked at me with pity. "She moved out 3 days ago. Paid in cash. Left no forwarding address." I felt the ground tilt. "Where did she go?" He shook his head. "I don't know, sir. I'm sorry." I drove to the property, alone this time. The land was exactly as it had been 5 months ago, empty, untouched. No construction, no materials, no crew, just wind and grass and ocean. I stood there shaking. I called the lawyer's office. "That number is no longer in service." I called Mila. Disconnected. I walked to the edge of the bluff, where Rowena and I had stood, where I'd imagined our future, and I realized I'd been destroyed. I sat on the ground and tried to breathe. I pulled out my phone and reviewed every transaction, every receipt, every photo. Everything looked real. How was it all fake? I searched online for Rowena's name, found fragments, a forum post from 2 years ago, an American man warning others about a resort scam in the Philippines. The woman's name wasn't Rowena, but the story was identical. Land that wasn't hers, a contractor named Javier, fake permits. I felt bile rise in my throat. I wasn't the first. I wasn't even the second. I tried calling Australian authorities. "This is a civil matter," they said. "You'd need to pursue it through Philippine courts." "What are my chances?" "Honestly, sir, very low, especially if she's left the country." I hung up and stared at the ocean. $370,000 gone. My entire retirement, my future, my dignity, all gone. And the woman I loved, she'd never existed. I hired a Filipino attorney. AUD. Cruz was in his 50s, experienced, blunt. "Let me be honest with you, Mr. Kenneth. Cases like this rarely end well. I just need to know the truth," I said. He investigated for 2 weeks. When he called me into his office, his face was grim. "The land title is fake," he said. He slid documents across the desk. "This property belongs to a corporation based in Manila. It's never been for sale. The title Rowena provided, it's a template, printed, stamped, but completely fraudulent." I stared at the papers. "And the permits? Also fake. The government offices she claimed to work with have no record of any application under your name or hers. The receipts? Printed templates. The lawyer she introduced you to? Not registered with the Bar Association." I felt like I was drowning. "Who is she?" "AUD." Cruz pulled up a file. "Her real name might not even be Rowena." I found complaints from 3 other foreign men, 2 Americans, 1 Australian. Similar story, same land, same contractor named Javier. One man filed criminal charges but dropped them after spending $20,000 with no results. Where is she now? Unknown. Possibly Malaysia or Singapore. She's done this before. She'll do it again. I sat there numb. "Can I recover anything?" He looked at me with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kenneth. The money is gone." I met with a local contractor named Marco. He'd heard about my situation. We sat in a small cafe. "I warned Javier," Marco said. "Told him to leave you alone." "You knew?" "Everyone in the construction community knew. Rowena and Javier have done this 6, maybe 7 times. Always foreign men. Always the same story. Why didn't anyone stop them?" Marco looked uncomfortable. "It's complicated. Javier has connections. People are afraid. And honestly, most of us thought you'd do your due diligence." "I thought I did," I whispered. He shook his head. "You trusted her. That's not the same thing." I wanted to be angry at him, at everyone who knew, but I was just tired. "Is she even from Baguio?" "I don't know. The woman I've seen with Javier has used different names, different stories." I felt a sob building in my chest. "I loved her." Marco looked away. "I'm sorry." That was the moment I truly understood. Everything was a lie, every word, every touch, every promise. I'd been a target from the first moment I walked into that tourism office. She'd seen a lonely widower with savings and patience, and she'd played me perfectly. I flew back to Brisbane a week later. I couldn't afford to stay longer. I'd used credit cards to cover the legal fees, the investigation, the hotel. I landed at night and took a taxi to my apartment, the place I'd barely lived in for 6 months because I'd been so focused on the Philippines, on her, on us. My son called the next morning. "Dad, how was the trip?" I couldn't lie anymore. "It's gone. All of it." "What's gone?" "The money, the resort, everything." She disappeared. Silence. "Dad, I'm coming over." "You don't have to. I'm coming over." He arrived an hour later, sat with me while I explained everything. He didn't say "I told you so." He didn't lecture. He just listened. "What are you going to do?" he asked finally. "I don't know. Move to a smaller apartment. Find part-time work maybe. At 62? I don't have a choice." He looked devastated. "I can help. Not much, but something." I shook my head. "This is my mess. You're my father." I felt tears finally come. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He hugged me. "It's not your fault. She's a professional. She knew exactly what she was doing. But it was my fault. I'd ignored every warning, every red flag, because I was lonely, because I wanted to believe." Tony visited 2 days later, brought beer, sat with me in silence for a while. "I'm not here to say I told you so," he finally said. "Good. I'm here to tell you you're going to survive this." I laughed bitterly. "Am I?" "Yeah, you are, because you're too stubborn to let her win completely." I appreciated that. We drank in silence. That night, alone, I tried to calculate. How many years would I need to work to recover even half of what I lost? The math was impossible. I was 62. Part-time logistics consulting might bring in $40,000 a year. After rent, food, bills, I'd be lucky to save $10,000 annually. 18 years to recover half. I'd be 80. I searched online for Rowena. Found a Facebook profile I'd never seen before. Photos of her in Manila, 3 weeks ago, at an upscale restaurant. Smiling. Beautiful. The caption read, "New beginnings." She looked happy, unbothered, completely unaffected. I stared at that photo for 2 hours. The woman I'd loved, the woman who'd destroyed me, they were the same person. I couldn't reconcile it. I read the comments, friends congratulating her. Someone mentioned she was moving abroad, Malaysia maybe, starting fresh. I finally understood. I wasn't a person to her. I was a transaction, a solution to a problem. She'd needed money, and I'd needed purpose. She'd given me the illusion of purpose, and I'd given her everything. I found an old email from her I'd somehow missed, from 4 months ago. Casual, sweet. She'd mentioned sorting out some family debts. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Now, I saw it clearly. She'd been setting up the exit, justifying why she'd need money quickly, why she might disappear. She'd planned everything, every step, every word. I drafted a message to her, wrote it and rewrote it, asked why, begged for an explanation, told her I loved her, told her I hated her. Then I deleted it all. She'd never respond. And even if she did, what could she possibly say that would matter? I thought about my late wife, Margaret. What would she think of me? Would she be disappointed? Angry? Or would she just hold me like she used to when I made mistakes? I drove to her grave, sat on the grass. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I dishonored your memory. I dishonored us. I was just so lonely." The wind rustled through the trees. No answer, no forgiveness, just silence. I tried to warn others, posted my story in expat forums, retirement groups, Philippines travel pages. Some people thanked me, most ignored it. A few accused me of racism, bitterness, lying. "Not all Filipino women are scammers," they wrote. "You're just a bitter old man." I wasn't trying to say all Filipino women were scammers. I was trying to say, be careful, verify everything. Don't let loneliness override common sense. But the responses hurt, so I stopped posting. The shame was too heavy. I moved to a smaller apartment, 1 bedroom, cheaper rent, sold furniture I didn't need. My son helped me move. "You'll get through this, Dad," he said. "Maybe." I took a part-time job at a small logistics company, data entry mostly, quiet work. The younger employees were kind but distant. I was the old guy who came in 3 days a week. I went home to an empty apartment, microwave dinners, reruns of old shows. This was my life now. At night, I still thought about Rowena. Not with love, Not even with hate, just with exhaustion. How many other men had she done this to? Was I the worst? The easiest? Did she ever think about me? Months passed. Then one day, I received a Facebook message from a stranger. You posted about a woman named Rowena. Resort scam. Philippines. My heart raced. Yes, she got me too. 3 years ago. 200,000 Canadian dollars. We talked on the phone for an hour. His story was nearly identical to mine. Same land. Same contractor. Same loving reassurances. Same disappearance. Did you get any money back? I asked. No. I hired lawyers. Spent another 15,000 trying. Gave up eventually. I just wanted you to know you're not alone. It didn't fix anything. But I felt less ashamed. I wasn't uniquely stupid. I was just human. Thank you for reaching out, I said. Take care of yourself, he replied. After we hung up, I sat in the dark. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was knowing I'd lost the ability to trust myself. I'd ignored my instincts, ignored my son, ignored Tony, because I wanted to believe, because loneliness made me vulnerable. And she'd known that. She'd weaponized it perfectly. A year after I lost everything, I was still living small, still working part-time, still alone. I didn't date, couldn't even imagine it. Every conversation felt like a potential trap. I saw a news story about a romance scam ring in Southeast Asia. Dozens of victims, millions stolen. I wondered if Rowena was part of it. Probably. One evening, Tony visited. You seem different, he said. How? I don't know. Quieter, maybe. More guarded. Shouldn't I be? He shrugged. I guess. I just miss the version of you that had hope. I laughed bitterly. That version cost me everything. Maybe. But he was also happier. I didn't know how to respond. Was hope worth the destruction it caused? I didn't think so. But I also didn't know how to live without it. I started volunteering at a senior center, talking to other retirees about financial safety, scam awareness. Some listened. Most thought they were too smart to fall for it, just like I had. I tried to warn them gently. I thought that too, I'd say. Just verify everything independently. Some thanked me. Others looked at me like I was paranoid. I stopped pushing. 2 years later, I finally deleted Rowena's number, her photos, every digital trace. But I couldn't delete the memory. I still saw her face sometimes when I closed my eyes, still heard her voice. Thank you for believing in me. I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the Brisbane River at sunset. The water moved steadily, indifferent, constant. I thought about everything I'd lost, the money, the dream, the version of myself that believed in second chances. But I was still here, still breathing, still surviving. I wanted to believe her, I said aloud to no one. And that's on me. The acknowledgement didn't fix anything, but it was true. I'd chosen to ignore the warnings. I'd chosen trust over caution. I'd chosen hope over reality. And I'd paid for it. Would I make different choices now? Absolutely. Did that change anything? No. The money was gone. The time was gone. The future I'd imagined was gone. All I had left was the knowledge that I'd survived. That had to be enough, because nothing else was coming. No justice, no redemption, no closure. Just the quiet reality of living smaller than I'd planned, and somehow, slowly, painfully, learning to be okay with that, or at least learning to exist within it. I didn't forgive her. I couldn't. But I was learning, slowly, to forgive myself, for being human, for being lonely, for wanting something real, even if it never was. One day, I received a message from a young man, mid-30s. He'd seen one of my old forum posts. I'm thinking about retiring early in the Philippines, he wrote. Investing in property. Any advice? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I wrote back, hire your own lawyer, verify every document independently, never let love or loneliness override due diligence. If someone tells you to trust them, that's when you need to be most careful. He thanked me. I hoped he'd listen. I hoped he wouldn't need to learn the way I did. But I knew hope didn't change much. I logged out and looked around my small apartment. This was my life now. Modest, careful, small. I'd lost the ability to dream big. Lost the willingness to risk. Lost the part of me that believed people were fundamentally good. Rowena had taken all of that, and she'd left me with just enough to survive. Maybe that was the cruelest part. Not destroying me completely, just breaking me enough that I'd spend the rest of my life carrying the weight of what I'd lost. But I was still here, still surviving, and some days that felt like enough.